Hello and welcome again, and I'd like to introduce you to my colleague and friend Joe de Montgros, who is the founding partner, one of the founding partners of a company called Everoze, which is a renewable energy consulting company with an extremely unusual and individual approach to views on management and leadership. So I'm going to ask Joe some questions, and I think you'll find it extremely interesting. Okay, Joe, so tell us something about how you came to found Everoze.
So Everoze was founded in 2015. We registered the company in May of that year and then officially launched in September. So there was a good 6 months of planning in between the original concept and the full launch. As you indicated earlier, the company was started by 6 people and very quickly joined by a 7th founder. And I suppose, like most companies, we started with the idea, quickly got into the nuts and bolts, all the things that you actually have to do to launch a company. And at the same time, we were developing a strategic plan in the background.
And how many people are you now? So
just coming up to 50.
50, so
in
that's
4 years.
Yeah, tremendous growth. And do you mind telling us what the turnover is?
We're about 6 million, we're just finishing and just calculating the numbers for this year, but hoping to hit about close to 7 million in our 4th year of operations.
And you opened some offices in Europe, I think.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
So in our first year, we had both the UK offices, 2 offices in the UK, and 2 offices in France, in Paris and Lyon. And since then, we have a formal office in Madrid, fairly recent in Madrid, as well as individual staff members in Spain, in Seville, and in Freiburg in Germany. And we've just had another person join us in Milan, in Italy.
And you mentioned that it took a few months to kind of formulate the kind of concept of what the business was going to be. What did it end up as?
Oh, I suppose it's still evolving to some extent. I think it helped that we had all come from a consultancy background. So within a consultancy, what we're selling is our knowledge through our time. We don't have specific products, for example. And so that was our core, that where we come from, and that's remained the core of our services now. Most of the services are for owners, developers and investors of renewable energy projects. And the work itself is very varied. It might be helping a market entrant with a strategic piece of work. It might be helping our divestment strategy for a large project. And the projects that we work on range from a single turbine or a very small solar project up to the biggest offshore wind farms. So that's the core of what we do. And the evolution bit that's been really interesting are how we've expanded this idea of doing consultancy services to bring in things that require us to take perhaps a bit more of an ownership stake in the projects that we're working on. So in some cases we put our own equity into projects up front, or we take on a success fee basis on what we're doing. So we put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, with the work that we're doing.
And what I'm particularly interested in is your views on management and leadership, because I know when we first met, when you were founding the business, we talked about these concepts, and they're extremely unusual, and you managed to stick to them and develop them. So tell us a little bit about your views on management and leadership.
I think the views that we first spoke about when we were starting the business were in many respects a response to having taken a very rapid transition from a small, almost family-orientated business up to a mega corporate. The company that we used to work for had gone from 60, 80 people, certainly when I joined, up to 16,000. So there had been a big transition, and so I think in many respects what we were looking at doing, we're trying to take the best bits of how we had worked when we were much smaller, but applying those in a way that still made sense with taking the best bits out of that corporate identity. So in a way, what we've done is ask the question about, well, what should management look like? And we've said, well, what does management need to do? And we've tried to limit our management to those bits that we actually need and we think will bring a lot of benefit to the company, rather than just saying, well, we'll have management because that's how it's done.
So you don't have traditional management structures, as I understand
You don't
it.
have any.
You don't have any management
No.
structures. No, that's right. And that's what people will find a little unusual to understand, but you don't have any management structures. So how does the business operate on a day-to-day basis?
We replace structure and hierarchy with process and teams. And probably the closest type of management to the system that we use is holacracy. But we don't use holacracy either. But this idea of self-organising units and teams where teams are needed is very much how we work. The processes themselves emerged as we grew. We didn't have them all there on day one. I think on day one it was relatively chaotic, and I think you can be chaotic with just 6 people. We all spoke to each other a lot. We all knew what we had to do. We knew what was happening. And then it got to 15, and then it got to 20, and you can't all be involved in every decision. So at that point, we found that the processes came quite organically out of the way that we all wanted to work. And what we've ended up with are many different teams of people that have delegated responsibilities. We have committees for the activities that would normally be, in a way, delegated to the management team. They're actually delegated to a broad team that simply wants to work on those topics. And then we have a process of consultation and seeking advice. So anybody can make any decision, but if that decision is outside of their competence, then we ask people to seek advice from people that have the competence before that decision is actually finalised. We have very open and transparent communication, so that before any decision is taken, we communicate a minded to position. So we don't require that everybody takes part in every decision, but every decision that is taken is put out there for input from those that have an opinion. And so far, that's worked very well.
Yeah, and if I understand it correctly, then a lot of the teams and being part of a team is a lot of it is self-directed and it's voluntary in that sense. So if I want to be attached to a project, I can offer myself up to that project. Is that how it works?
It's how it works, and that's a really interesting area, because that's where some of the tensions can arise. Because we have individuals who might receive the first contact from a client, who then need to put a team together. But because we don't have bosses, nobody can say, you have to do this piece of work. It relies upon the empowerment and the responsibility for working together as a team to be at a much deeper level, so that as soon as any individual sees that others around need their support, they'll stick their hands up. It also, our whole structure requires everybody to be wholly in control of their own development. So if somebody who might be working in our solar groups wants some experience on wind, then we make it really clear that it's their responsibility to liaise with the people in the wind project. So when that opportunity on a wind project comes up, they also stick their hand up and say, I would like to get involved in this project. And it can be quite bewildering to people who have been used to being told what to do, or waiting to be given permission.
Do you think it requires a certain kind of person, or do you think the average person can in time respond to this this way of working? What do you think?
I think the average person can learn our system, but I think there are certain preferences that if you aren't the average person, if you maybe sit at one end of an extreme personality type, it can be very difficult to manage. And we have had some issues with people needing to adapt to the system, to learn to be comfortable with making those decisions, and learn that they don't have to keep on asking for permission to do something.
And
it's been great to see.
What have been some of the kind of interesting challenges that have arisen out of this? Because I know there have been some which you've kind of overcome, but some were unpredictable, some were maybe more predictable. What do you think some of the challenges have been for the partners?
Well, there was definitely a challenge when we went through that initial stage of growth. We were quite comfortable with what would probably be perceived as chaos in the early stages, and doing everything through consultation with each other. And then, so when we hit a certain point, I think we just felt quite overwhelmed definitely that sense of being overwhelmed with how can we manage this where we're taking a lot of time and energy to come to agreements. So it was really there that we started to put in place these processes and wider delegations of responsibilities. So that was quite easily overcome. And I think because we have done that, rather than reverting to hierarchies, it's given us a much stronger base for being an agile business, which is what was at the core of what we always wanted to do. So that's definitely one. The other thing, which is a challenge but is also related to success, is that by being agile, we've become in some respects a victim of our own success. So when our clients phone us up, and because we don't have any management faff to deal with, we can get on with the work very quickly and without any barriers and obstacles. We can deliver quickly because we don't have to wait for various rounds of approvals internally. Clients really like that. And we've aimed to be a very client-centric company so that we can react quickly. But then when you get lots of your very good clients all wanting the work to be done quickly at the same time,
setting up
and learning how to manage that. It's a little bit more subtle than just learning to say no, because we don't want to say no, but finding ways of prioritising our work, calling upon each other to help each other out, and finding ways to manage the workflow with our clients, because so often when you actually ask when something is needed, it's perhaps not always needed on the day it's needed. So developing relationships with our clients that enables us to have those conversations has certainly helped.
And do you find you've got sort of returning clients stay with you a long time, or is it a churn of clients?
We have some new clients, but a lot of our clients have been with us from the very beginning, or when they've started working with us, they've stayed. It doesn't mean it's exclusive. They work with others. But they certainly work with us again and again, and we've even had funny situations where clients have almost written their own proposals and signed it and sent it to us and said, well, here you go, get started.
Off you go.
Whereas other clients will take us through a process of 2 or 3 weeks of competitive bidding for a piece of work. So by having those relationships, we save ourselves a lot of time on unsuccessful bidding for work that we might not get.
So really agile.
I hope so.
And one of the things I know you've been grappling with fairly recently is this whole business of people's development, because you said quite clearly that people are responsible for their own development. They can kind of do whatever they like in terms of the development, as long as it's sensible for within the business. But usually that requires some kind of management structure. But how have you overcome that aspect of it?
I think I'd firstly challenge a little bit that you get that kind of personal development in most hierarchical structures. What I've seen in a lot of corporates is if you're lucky enough to be considered an A-grade student and you get pushed to the top of the pile, you probably get a lot of money spent on your development. But there's a lot of people floundering in the middle of the pack that get very little, and they might get feedback, they might get on-the-job training, but dedicated leadership support. So that aside, the one thing that I hope anybody would get to go alongside the more traditional development is mentoring. And we have one-on-one buddying systems when people enter our business to try and help them to understand how we operate. And then we assign mentors, career mentors, to help that individual be their advocate within the business. And that might also be either providing coaching, or it might be identifying external coaches to address specific one-on-one issues. There's then on-the-job training that we do through our work, and again, by being agile and letting people move around within their technology and sector groups, everybody's getting a lot of sector experience as well. Now, the really interesting thing is that we don't have job titles. So some people come to us and they say that they're looking to enter some kind of ladder system so that they can get a really, really fancy job title. And we just say, well, I'm sorry, but that won't happen at Everoze. And I think for people who've been in traditional businesses, that's quite a strange concept. But what we say is that if you join the company, you'll get involved in running the business from day one. And because the whole thing is transparent, you will see how every aspect of our business is being operated. And if you would like to take part in any of that, you're very welcome to. So in a way, our graduates are on a mini MBA from the day they start working with us. And I think that as a form of personal development is really priceless.
And what about reward and recognition? So if it's a very flat structure in this sense, then if there's a distribution of profits or whatever, how is that handled?
Well, we do distribute profits, and that's actually very important to us because we have an employee-owned basis. So everybody is or will be an owner in the business. So we allocate options to people when they join the business, and they become dividend bearing after a certain period of time. But because there's a period of time before that kicks in, we want to have another mechanism whereby everybody that's contributing can take some of that benefit home. So we have flat profit share, and as you might expect, as in a company like ours, we sat down before we put the profit share in place and said, how would everybody like this to work? We had some really interesting debates as to whether everybody should take home the same, whether it should be staged so that some people took home more than others. There were some very good debates on the topic, and then we voted, and at that point it was completely open to the vote, and everybody voted for a flat profit share. So regardless of who you are in the company, as long as you've been there through the year, you take home profit share, so you pro rata. So even if you've been there a week, you'll take home a week's pro rata for that year. And on top of it, we aim to provide slightly above market salaries with traditional benefits in terms of pensions, etc. So a lot of that is fairly conventional in terms of the benefits package. But the ownership stake is a key part of what we need to be there for the long term.
And I know from talking to you and knowing you before that one of the outcomes of this kind of culture that you're kind of creating or have created is that you want people to be happy at work. Tell us a bit about the importance of happiness.
It's measured in different ways, isn't it? And again, if you ask two different people in our company what makes them happy at work, you'd get different things. Some people might go to getting home to their families straight to the what actually happens outside of work. And some people would go straight into being involved in really interesting work. So I think we try and enable everybody to be happy in their own way. We allow a lot of flexibility around working. It's not quite as extreme as, but it's almost a sort of work where you want, when you want.
Yeah, you don't have to come into the office, do you?
No.
You work wherever is comfortable for you, so there is no kind of central...
There's no set office hours or requirement to be. There's no presenteeism in the office. So that's one part of it. And then, again, by empowering everybody and almost requiring everybody to work on what they want to work on, everybody can push as hard as they like into areas that interest them. So it's a combination of that sense of purpose with the more sort of mechanics of meeting needs, and it's always a balance between those two. And I think, again, going back to some of the challenges, I think where we have seen challenges, it's in that fine-tuning balance, because everybody's very motivated, everybody wants to work hard. So the biggest risk we actually have is people working too hard. And they're very happy and they're very happy, and suddenly they're not very happy. So that's something, again, we manage through our structure and our culture.
And the mentors and coaches will come in at that point, I think.
Absolutely, yes.
Really, really fascinating and quite a unique approach, Jo. I think when I first spoke to you when you were starting up, I was slightly sceptical about the success of this kind of culture, but it's proven to be very successful. And one final question. Do you think it's scalable? And if so, how scalable do you think?
We think there are limits. So we've set, I wouldn't call it an upper ceiling, an absolute number we can't go past, but we think it's achievable to grow up to about 70. I think we could probably push it to 80, but 70 is sort of where we've put our comfort zone at the moment. And naturally, that places limits on what we can do. So we're at the moment exploring ways to manage around some of those barriers. The kind of culture that we have also makes it difficult to do certain types of work. So if we want to work in a sector that requires to be more hierarchical and requires us to employ people that are perhaps less incentivised by working in a company like ours, we have to do something different. So we're currently looking at setting up some joint ventures. So we'll have sister companies to our existing company where we can take the bits of the culture that we want and bring in other aspects of the culture that might be more suitable. And in a way, we almost have that now, whereas we have some slightly different cultures that exist between our regional offices and within some of our technology groups. So we do allow there to be some difference, and we think that that is a way of growing. So we won't be growing under the same single sort of Everoze structure, but we're looking at ways of expanding through different ownership structures.
So, Joe, it's been terrific having you here. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And it is such a fascinating potential that I'm going to watch it very closely, as I have done in the past, but I'm sure it'll be very successful. So I just wanted to thank Joe on behalf of all of us here, and I'm sure we're going to have an interesting debate about all the aspects that Joe has mentioned. So thank you once again.